Morning, everybody. The recording alert you just heard is a recording that will be only kept for internal purposes. It will not be published. So thank you for joining this morning to another EMFA Talk morning. I am Sofia Verza, Research Associate at the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom at the European University Institute. As you might know, in 2025, we started this tour across EMFA provisions. And today we will specifically look into Article 18, the so-called providing the so-called media privilege for media service providers vis-a-vis online platforms. The next EMFA Talk will be on the 24th of March, and we will focus on Article 6, so the duties of media service providers under EMFA. I would like, before giving the floor to our guests today, who are Audrius Perkauskas, Deputy Head of Unit at the Audiovisual and Media at the European Commission, DG Connect.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, Audrius. Thanks for being here. Damian Tambini, Senior Lecturer at the London School of Economics. Carlos Echevarria, Coordinator for Public Policy at Maldita. And Renate Schroeder, Director of the European Federation of Journalists. So before giving the floor to Audrius, I would like to offer a quick overview of Article 18. I am sharing my screen in this regard. I hope you can see it. Hello, Carlos. I think now Carlos is connected. Can you see my screen? Yes, I take it as a yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So the Article 18 is a pretty long article, so we thought it could be useful to have a kind of visual overview before starting our conversation today. So Article 18 was enacted together with the whole European Media Freedom Act in April 2024, and it will be in force since August 2025. And I would say that one of the main objectives of the article is to tackle the asymmetrical power relationships between media service providers and online platforms when it comes to content moderation. Namely the suspension of services and the restriction of visibility of media content on very large online platforms. This article recognizes the importance of editorial processes for the selection and distribution of information for democratic deliberation. And what we will discuss today is, among other things, if this so-called also non-interference principle, it was called when the media privilege was proposed, discussed in the Digital Services Act, if this will really be effective, if it could really be effective in tackling these asymmetrical power relationships. So what it provides is that media service providers can self-declare to very large online platforms. And in case of content moderation, the latter enjoy expeditious rights to an explanation before the content gets removed. Media service providers have the right to reply to platforms' actions, and they can also lodge a complaint and engage in a dialogue with the platform. They can appeal to the board, the European Board of Media Services, that was also established by the European Media Freedom Act. And platforms are required to report on such practices of content moderation, but also of dealing with self-declarations on a yearly basis. So paragraph 1 of the European Media Freedom Act looks into this self-declaration process, providing that the platforms should set up a functionality allowing media service providers to self-declare as such. In order to declare to be a media service, these services should declare to comply with Article 6, Paragraph 1 of the European Media Freedom Act, which is the article where transparency of media ownership is provided with regards to ownership and to state advertising received. Also, they should declare to be editorially independent from political actors, both within and outside the EU. They should declare to be subject to regulatory or self-regulatory mechanisms governing editorial standards. Also, they should declare not to provide content generated by artificial intelligence systems without subjecting it to human review, their legal name and contact details, and also the contact details of the relevant national regulatory authorities or co-regulatory or self-regulatory authorities or mechanisms. And finally, here I recall paragraph 9 of Article 18, because it is where it is stated that the European Commission should issue guidelines in order to facilitate the effective implementation of Article 18, and which are to be expected in the near future. But maybe Audrius can refer to this later on. Paragraph 4 of Article 18 is actually the core, I would say, of the article, which provides this so-called privilege procedure for media service providers when their content gets moderated on online platforms. So when a VLOP decides to suspend their services for a media service provider or to restrict the visibility of the content of a media service, prior to such a decision, they should communicate it with a statement of reason to the media service provider, who has the opportunity to reply to this statement of reason within 24 hours, or in the case of a crisis of an emergency, even in a shorter time frame, sufficient though to reply in a meaningful manner. And this is also maybe something we could discuss upon the timing allowed. Following the absence of a reply, and when a decision is taken to suspend or restrict visibility of content, the VLOP should inform the media service provider without undue delay. And then to conclude, it is stated that basically Article 18 is applicable outside of the cases of content moderation regulated by the Digital Services Act, in particular Articles 28, 34, and 35, which are those referring to the monitoring and assessment of systemic risks under the Digital Services Act. Then if we look at paragraphs 5, 6, and 7 of the European Media Freedom Act, these are basically the so-called, we could call them the appeal mechanisms under the article. So it provides that VLOPs should take all the necessary technical and organizational measures to ensure that complaints are processed and decided upon with priority and without undue delay. Also, when a media service provider considers that a VLOP has repeatedly restricted or suspended their content without sufficient grounds, the VLOP provider should engage in a meaningful and effective dialogue with the media service provider with a view to find an amicable solution. And also the media service provider can request the board to issue an opinion on the outcome of such a dialogue. And finally, when no amicable solution is found, or where a provider of a very large online platform rejects or invalidates a declaration, the self-declarations that we talked about a little bit earlier under paragraph 1, then it is possible to resort to mediation or out-of-court dispute settlement for the media service provider. And this last point, paragraph 7, basically is stating that it is in the hands of VLOPs to decide if to accept or reject self-declarations. And probably this will also be object of our discussion today. Finally, there are some transparency requirements for VLOPs. Namely, on a yearly basis, they should publish detailed information on the number of instances in which restrictions and suspensions are imposed on media service providers, the grounds for such restrictions and suspensions, the number of dialogues in which they engaged in, and the number of instances in which it rejected declarations by media service providers. I am very happy to leave the floor to our guests today, and I would ask to all of you to feel free at the end of these presentations to jump in, ask questions, or to write them in our chat. Thank you. Audrius, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Sofia, for the floor, and also for this very clear and structured presentation, which makes my life very easy this morning. But still, I have things to say, things to add. So first of all, I would like to underline that in terms of safeguarding the digital information space and improving the quality, we could say, of a digital information space. Of course, the Media Freedom Act will function hand in hand with the Digital Services Act. And as you, Sofia, rightly pointed out, the Media Freedom Act, it will not affect cases when very large online platforms take measures against illegal content. So this is one very clear exclusion. And then the Media Freedom Act also will not affect cases where platforms assess and take measures to mitigate systemic risks. So this is already clear. So then we are really, what we're talking about is for a narrower circle of cases when very large online platforms moderate content of media service providers on the basis of their terms of reference, which is not about the illegal content or about mitigation of systemic risks under Digital Services Acts. So this is one point. And another point is this delicate balance between self-declaration and those procedural safeguards. So, of course, it will be important how the self-declaration works in practice, and I will come in a minute also to the question of guidelines. But in principle, let's say the broad picture is that the content which benefits from safeguards is the content coming from media service providers which already exercise editorial responsibility over the content. So that's the idea, that if content has been subject to the exercise of editorial responsibility, then it is indeed a bit strange if it disappears, for example, from the platform based on the private terms of the service. So then, of course, we come to those rather sensitive points in the self-declaration mechanism that the media service providers would have to declare that they are subject either to regulation for the purpose of exercise of editorial responsibility or self-regulation mechanisms. So they will do that declaration. And then the platform will have an additional possibility in case of a reasonable doubt to check this fact with either normally the media regulator or the self-regulatory mechanism. So that let's say here what we want to achieve in principle is let's say we want to achieve a balance between two objectives, because on the one hand we want to make a self-declaration system workable and easy to use for media service providers and for a variety of media service providers, because as you know better than me, the media space is evolving, and we see different types of new players entering media markets, and sometimes they are not necessarily associated to traditional media regulation or self-regulation structures, but still it would be important that their media content is also protected from unjustified moderation practices of very large online platforms. So that's one objective. But then on the other hand, the objective is also to protect the self-declaration system against abuses, because of course we also see let's say dishonest practices of so-called bots, mirroring accounts and so on, which pretend to be media service providers, and they might also want to cheat a little bit the system and to pretend in the self-declaration system that they are media service providers which exercise editorial responsibilities subject to regulation or self-regulation, while this is not the case. And so the second objective is to find a practicable way to detect such cases and make sure that such content does not benefit from the safeguards. So in short, this is the main challenge of the forthcoming guidelines on the implementation of a self-declaration system. And we had a first round of targeted exchanges with some associations representing different interests in the media space. We took a lot of inspiration from those initial exchanges, and we are actually getting closer and closer to having a concrete draft of the guidelines. And we hope that by the end of March, we will be able to launch a more formal consultation of those guidelines, which will give all the interested organizations and associations an opportunity to express their views and to comment, to make suggestions on those envisaged guidelines. Of course, in Article 18, you have much more. You also have the possibility of structured dialogue down the line between the media service providers and very large online platforms when repeated cases of unjustified removals arise, and also to take not so much on those cases because of course those are subject to separate procedure of finding an amicable solution. But in a way, the idea of structured dialogue between platforms and media service providers is to take stock of experience in general, of experience of application of Article 18, and also of such cases where things don't work smoothly in particular. But that is in a way a little bit for later, because in any case, the article will start applying, formally speaking, from August. So for those structured dialogues, probably we still have to wait a little bit. Our new board, well, not our, but the independent new board for media services is already starting to plan their work, also to get involved in those structured dialogues, but probably we should not expect anything tangible before the end of the year on that front. So this is from my side a brief addition to what you have described, Sofia, and I'm more than happy to engage in discussion and to answer more targeted questions that you may have on different aspects of Article 18. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrius. I would leave the floor to our commenters before opening the possibility to ask questions. I myself have many already, but let's hear from Damian Tambini first. Thanks, Damian, for being with us. Damian is a senior lecturer at the London School of Economics.
Good morning, Sofia. Thank you very much. And thank you, Audrius, for the presentation as well. I wanted just to raise some general framing points since I'm the first to respond. And those points are about, I guess, as we think about the guidance and as we think about the process of self-declaration unfolding, what are the things that we might need to worry about? What's the framing of this? And when Alda invited me to speak, she said that I should speak about what I call the paradox of privilege as a starting point, which is a simple observation, really, that when in the media freedom space we offer privileges to media, there is always a tension and even what we might call a paradox, which is we're trying to support media, but in doing so, we introduce a danger of a new vector for controlling media. And that, at a high level, I think that's the kind of tension and the problem that we should think about. I'll be a little bit more specific. In thinking about setting up encouraging a structured dialogue, we should be thinking about the overall burden on the various players, but also unintended consequences that might arise. And we should also think about implications, for example, for who benefits, who is actually likely to self-declare. And here I think that thinking about whether small, non-professional, non-profit and local media do not, in this first period, tend to self-declare. And I don't think it's intended to introduce a framework that would discriminate against non-profit and local. So that's something I think we need to monitor. I think there are also questions, given that the procedure requires reference to regulatory and self-regulatory bodies as providing evidence that you should benefit from the privilege, whether those small and non-profit will be able to refer to that, and also what constitutes, for the purposes of this framework, a self-regulatory body. So around Europe, there's quite a lot of difference in terms of the role of national press councils, but also journalist unions and other bodies and internal news ombuds, so complaints editors and so forth. So it would be useful to have in that guidance some clarity and hopefully broad criteria for actually defining what's self-regulation for the purpose of this legislation, in fact, are. And also, I would hope that in doing so, there is an eye to really thinking about the various levels of independence of those self-regulatory bodies and the importance of independence of self-regulation. In relation to that, obviously, there are lots of Council of Europe standards that could be referred to in terms of independence of regulation and self-regulation. And I would also suggest the safeguards set out by the Council of Europe in 2021 on media and communication governance. The principles for media and communication governance are also relevant to that. So just to sum up, we can come back to this. In general, particularly given current world events, but it's always the case when thinking about new frameworks for media governance, we should try and future-proof them. Therefore, pose the question how they will stand up in the event of a future authoritarian turn in any member state or the EU as a whole, and think about whether giving new tools to authoritarians or whether we are actually putting in place new safeguards. I think we need to think quite hard about the guidance. I think we need to monitor whether self-declarations are actually going to discriminate against certain forms of self-regulation, but also small non-profit and local media. And we need to monitor very carefully. And I hope that the objective in all of this is that we think quite hard about different sorts of frameworks which would be necessary to maintain public trust in this kind of complex co-regulation, because the public actually have to understand this in order to trust it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damian. I don't know, Audrius, if you would like to comment back, or we leave it for later.
I would suggest that we perhaps hear from other participants as well. And for example, if we have similar concerns, this would allow, to respond better to the comments made. So I would prefer to listen more.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Great. Then I will leave the floor to Renate Schroeder. She is the director of the European Federation of Journalists. Thanks, Renate, to be with us.
Thank you, Sofia. Thank you very much once again for the whole CMPF team to have, I think it's a fourth webinar now we have on different articles on the EMFA, most of these articles with specific importance for journalists. So this is very much appreciated for the FJ, for our affiliates, and also there is quite a lot of academic drafting you have done. Elda is there and Eva, so this has all been very useful. Before giving just a few comments from what we have heard so far from this journalist perspectives about Article 18, but also 19, it was fortunately mentioned because I think it's very important. Let me just say 3 points at the outset. We all know, but I think it's important to frame the whole thing. The first is, of course, as we all know, we are living through a period of extreme uncertainties when it comes to the economic future of journalism and independent media, of course, also when it comes to trust, when it comes to the support for journalism as a public good, which is challenged, to put it moderately, and I do not have to say by whom. Second, our enemies are the autocrats and the opaque algorithms by a few digital monopolies with now strong ties to the US government, who overflood social networks with hate, lies, disinformation, deepfakes, you name it. And third, with the applaud, while we applaud the European Union for having adopted 4 legislative packages, the DMA, the DSA has been mentioned, the A Act, and of course the EMFA, all with the aim to make our info ecosystem more transparent and accountable, we face the issue that the digital platforms, the big tech giants who are today's gatekeepers of content, are not liable. while the shrinking media service providers have to follow standards of editorial independence and are under liability regimes. Indeed, they differ very much from MS country to the other, and rightly so, to fulfill its role for our democracies. It's utterly important. But, and that's what I want to say, first of all, we face a platform privilege, and we haven't really dealt with that yet. There has been a lot of controversy around Article 18 in its making, which I do understand, given the increased media capture by oligarchs, governments, you name it. But dear colleagues, the EFJ has fought for a strong Article 18 that aims, and Sofia said it at the beginning, to re-establish some space for editorial and media and journalism in the online world by providing some specific guarantees for media content on the digital platforms. Let me just say again why this is so important to us. And again, I have 3 points. I have a few 3 points. I have 3 kids, so I like the number 3. First, given the media's role in informing the public opinion, a media privilege is a cornerstone of media freedom within European human rights and fundamental rights systems. We all know it, but it's good to say again. Though media privileges differ across European legal systems, they do share a common goal: to protect media freedom robustly and ensure the media's and journalism's role in the public sphere. Media law and ethical codes make journalists and media, as I said before, liable for the content they produce. The EMFA can also be considered, and I think that's important, as remedying over-eagerness to provide only proper content in order to sustain public debate on matters that are both important and difficult. Shocking or disturbing content may be important in the public discourse if prepared according to editorial standards and covered by freedom of expression. Second, these provisions aim to protect media content from unjust censorship from digital platforms based on their terms and conditions. The VLOPs are now required to provide their contact details for which the media can communicate directly and quickly with the media. This is, I believe, a significant step forward, specifically for smaller media and for the media in smaller EU countries, where media outlets were often ignored by platforms and lacked direct communication channels. So here I don't fully agree with Damian Tambini, who says that smaller local media would not use that. Point 3, Article 18 adds new requirements to benefit from this privilege, including being independent from entities linked to third states and political parties and being subject to regulatory or co-regulatory authorities or bodies. Sofia said it at the beginning. This is, if done according to the article, an excellent stimulus for media to be part of a self-regulatory mechanism if this is not yet the case. A challenge certainly is how to restrict this privilege to entities that surely adhere to professional journalism standards and which self-regulatory bodies is truly independent, here I completely agree with Damian, and does not only exist on paper. We know that national regulatory authorities, when captured, are not a guarantee of such verification. And here I also have a question to Audrius, because co-regulatory bodies, self-regulatory entities are mentioned, but we have quite a few member states who do not have self-regulatory bodies. So the question is who then, which body is dealing with that? The transparency provisions of Article 18 and 19 enable researchers and civil society members to monitor whether media privileges are being granted to deserving actors or whether the provisions are being abused. Their transparency must be taken very seriously, and the structured dialogue, which should include academics, civil society experts, journalist organizations under Article 19, also media, is crucial here. And it includes, we all know, to monitor adherence to self-regulatory initiatives. Here we are waiting for the Commission's guidelines regarding these challenging issues, and I'm happy to hear that we will get them by the end of the month. On that point, our members pay attention to 3 points when it comes to self-regulatory mechanisms. First, media regulatory bodies are not competent for information, or rarely competent on that, while journalistic self-regulatory bodies are. And I think it's a delicate matter, as we do not want media regulatory authorities to deal with news content. Second, the criteria of independence of any self-regulatory bodies must be strictly adhered. What's been said before, but it's important to say it again. And third, our affiliates are very cautious when it comes to some ISO standardization processes, just such as the Journalism Trust Initiative, as a relevant mechanism. To conclude, one more minute, Sofia, while there is a need to safeguard media freedom in the platform environment, specifically with the EMFA, but also the DSA and the platform approach of systematic risks prevails. This was said also. This complex regulatory matrix is difficult to coordinate and to oversee. We all know that, especially given the limited resources, and the political will is an open question here we may want to discuss later. It is clear that the openly hostile attitude of big tech toward the media and toward regulations poses a significant challenge, not only for the media, but for the democracy at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Renate. Just a note, I think what Audrius said earlier is that in the end of the month, a public consultation will be open, not that the guidelines will be published. But correct me if I'm wrong, Audrius, please.
No, that's correct.
You're right,
But
I think.
probably when Renate said we will get them, she meant getting for comments.
And now I will leave the floor to the last commenter today, Carlos Echevarria from Maldita, fact-checking organization based in Spain. Thank you, Carlos, for being with us.
Thank you, Sofia, and thank you to the CMPF colleagues for organizing this series of exchanges that I have found so useful. Obviously, Damian and Renate made great points, and I will repeat some of them. I don't think there's anyone who has been in or around the media sector that doesn't think that asymmetry exists, and has had terrible consequences in the past. So I think it was, it was time to get something similar to Article 18. Obviously, I think we can all agree, or at least I do agree, that editorial responsibility should be clearly not only incentivized, but also taken into account when other entities intend to moderate content. So if the editorial responsibility is already being exercised, I think that needs to account for something. I think our main concern during the discussions around then Article 17, now Article 18, had to do more about the actual application and the actual consequences of that editorial responsibility if it was happening. I think that the legislator on this rightly went for what was available in terms of ensuring that editorial responsibility was being exercised. Obviously, regulated media is part of that conversation, but as Renate has been saying, you cannot really trust that threshold forever when it comes to actually ensuring that those mechanisms are not captured. On a second level of, obviously, self-regulation has a lot of promise, but I'm Spanish, and as many other practicing journalists in other countries in the union, I can attest that self-regulation in the media sector hasn't been through press councils or any other entities very effective, not at being a presence in the ecosystem, more at making sure there are some consequences for rogue behavior, let's say, for the entities that might adopt some of these codes kind of vocationally, but do not really implement any of their content. So that was kind of the risky part of asserting the privilege and relying on self-regulation for that, to make sure that these kind of mechanisms couldn't be completely co-opted or created anew by rogue actors. I think these guidelines might be very, very effective to address some of those concerns, in the sense of clarifying and making sure that the process is transparent for these self-declarations, and that there is actually some accountability for the self-declarations afterwards. For me, one of the key factors here, it's obviously what it's contemplated in recital 53 and about, civil society and other organizations such as fact checkers being able to provide evidence during this process about the actual, let's say, implementation of this of the rules that self-regulation provides. I think that's a very important aspect, but I think it's all the more important that evidence, since this decision is very heavily in the hands of platforms that I share a lot of what Renate had to say about the role in our industry. I think it's very important that this process is as transparent as possible, that the evidence is public, so we can make sure that no one, if someone has to say something about whether or not a self-declaration should be accepted, that person or entity is willing to put that evidence in the public light and be contested, and not just use, let's say, privileged channels with the platforms to make sure this or that media outlet cannot benefit from the privilege. And I think that could be very, 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 very important. I think actually in the guidelines and in the way this privilege is actually functioning in real life, it's gonna be very important for the whole success of this regulation for these purposes, particularly because timing is of the issue for the legitimate media outlets who really exercise editorial responsibility and need to have proper action and prompt action when they are disadvantaged. But also on the other side, if you allow these mechanisms to be captured by actors who really don't care about editorial responsibility and have a business model that is based on propagating lies some of the time, then timing is of the essence as well for those contents to be removed. I think, as Audrius was saying, the DSA, let's say, caveats within the regulation take care of part of this. But I think it's important to get the guidelines right and ensure that the whole process of self-declarations and remaining a self-declarating media for the purposes of Article 18. I think it's very important that it's public, transparent, and we have as much access to that information as possible, because that's going to allow us not only to know more about the media themselves, also it's going to allow us to know more about the effectiveness and the real impact of the self-regulation mechanisms themselves, which I think it's incredibly important also for the future of the media sector and the journalistic profession. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Carlos. So it's now time for questions from our audience. Anybody, please feel free to raise your hand or to write your question in the chat. Okay, I see, I don't know who raised their hand first. I see Roberta Carlini and Oliver.
Oliver first. Oliver first.
Please,
Hi,
Oliver.
hi. Yeah, thanks. Look, this is really fantastic presentation of the problems. Just a really sort of quick question. If the Commission or anybody else has done any assessment of which of the member states have self-regulatory systems, which of those self-regulatory systems do we consider to be effective and credible, and what about countries which have no self-regulatory systems, and an assessment of the numbers involved, and what is the risk of a very large number of extremely high quality media not being able to access this privilege because of the lack of a credible self-regulatory system in their countries. So I wonder if there's any sort of assessment of this has been done. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Maybe Audrius, but also the other speakers today, if you would like to jump in, please.
Yes, thank you, Sofia. So indeed, it's probably about time that I try to react to different points made also earlier by Damian, Renate, and Carlos, and now by Oliver. So indeed, this question of the role of self-regulation and associated to that, how easy it will be for smaller media service providers to fulfill the self-declaration requirements is one of the central questions for the practical application of Article 18. And the so ultimately, I believe we need a balance between easiness of the system, well, between how easy the system is to use for media service providers, and then how demanding we are on the self-regulatory system. So what I mean is, let's imagine one approach. It's a purely theoretical. I'm not implying that we are going in that direction, but let's imagine an approach where the Commission would try to come up with a list, with a closed list of self-regulatory systems which are almost certified as independent. Theoretically, it's attractive because it would provide quite a lot of legal certainty for everyone, but there are inevitably dangers because to start with, with the very process and let's say the very exercise of deciding which self-regulatory system is robust and independent is, I would say, it's really complicated because, as Oliver says, so for a start, we need to understand which member states have self-regulatory systems at all, and then if to that we add also the question, okay, which of those are really robust and independent, then it all becomes really complicated because it would take, I think, quite a lot of time to do this assessment of robustness and independence, and ultimately we might end up with a very limited list of self-regulatory systems and perhaps with few or not no self-regulatory systems in some member states. So this, just to say that this is still at this stage quite an open question how to do that. And this is something where we will be welcoming your input in the public consultation too. At this stage, we're just trying to use all tools available to us to get more information about it. So of course, we are interacting with you and with Renate in particular. We are also doing so-called readiness checks with member states. So these are interactions with member states where we are going through different areas of Media Freedom Act, and we're trying to understand how prepared member states are for the full application of Media Freedom Act in August. And as part of exercise, we're also trying to understand from the perspective of member states, they think there are self-regulatory systems, suitable self-regulatory systems in their countries. So far, to answer Oliver's very specific question, the picture is not bad on this kind of numerical side. So we tend to see that that probably most member states have a structure which can be called a self-regulatory system. But I think that if we were to go into the second stage and try to sort out according to robustness and independence, that might of course change this overall result. And it's also true, talking about self-regulation, that when it comes to perhaps digitally born, let's give an example, digitally born media service providers or more recent digital service providers, which for the time being did not think of joining a self-regulatory system, that Media Freedom Act indeed, as Renate said, might act as a kind of incentive to join a self-regulatory system. And then, apart from independence and robustness, there is another important point that that those self-regulatory systems are relatively open for such newcomers. So we are trying also to highlight this in our ongoing conversations with different interested parties that for the whole system of Article 18 to work, it's also important when self-regulation is quite open and easy to join. So this is what I wanted to say by way of reactions to this first set of comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrius. Roberta, please.
Yes, thank you to Audrius and all the speakers. It is a very interesting debate. I wanted to try to propose a reality check, a reality test for this article. That is, let's assume that Article 18 is in force, and a few weeks ago, my question is related to PSMs. A few weeks ago, the editor-in-chief of a channel of the Italian PSM broadcasted a fake news story claiming that a member of the government would be acquitted in court. Instead, she was convicted. So fact-checking organization as well as fact-checking organization would say that that was not true. It was not. It was a fake news, and following this event, he had a vote of no confidence from the editorial staff, by the way. But my question is not, I don't want a judgment of this editor-in-chief, but it is, would in this case the PSM have enjoyed the privilege because it is PSM, because there is a self-regulatory system, because there are procedures on paper, everything is okay, but I mean, in an ideal world, that content should have been removed by the very large online platform because it was fake news. So what would happen in this case of the PSM broadcasting a fake news story? And a second question, more practical one to Audrius, is about the public consultation. If the Commission is also going to open a public consultation for the guidelines for Article 22 of the European Media Freedom Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. Maybe I will take another question from Mira and then get back to Audrius and the other speakers, of course, as well, if they want to jump in.
Thank you so much, Sofia, and thank you everyone for really helpful and informative presentations. I'll try to keep it quick to two questions. One is related to this balance that is happening at the moment between the political will of the Commission to fully implement the DSA, EMFA, and related regulations, and the power of platforms and the pushback. And what is it that we as a community can do to actually support the Commission or support journalism organizations to make sure that this happens? And then the second one is related to the conversation around self-regulatory bodies. For us, it's really important that small community and investigative journalism organizations that sometimes operate across several member states are able to self-declare. And the other thing is we see this whole process as dynamic rather than static. And of course, no self-regulatory mechanism will be absolutely perfect. There will be issues, but I agree there with the proposal that this, I think from Carlos, that this should be transparent and accountable, and that evidence of applying and adhering to self-regulatory professional frameworks is visible to the public. So that's one side of the story. The other which is question finally related to this, is whether it would be possible to create a process of self-declaration for self-regulatory mechanisms. So to have a mechanism by the board or the commission that we can actually follow who's maybe better the board, who's actually self-declaring that they are a relevant self-regulatory or co-regulatory mechanism in certain countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mira. Audrius, but also Damian, Renate, Carlos, if you would like to reply.
And Sofia, I
Yes,
just wanted
because
to say Thomas had a question maybe before Audrius responds.
Yes, I see there are also questions from Dirk and also others in the chat, but maybe not to overwhelm our speakers, I would please ask you to first reply and then get back to the questions.
okay, we can do it that way as well. So for Article 22 guidelines, this is in a way next in the row, but we plan to take a slightly different approach there. So now that member states are getting ready for the application of the Media Freedom Act, there is a lot of brainstorming going on in different member states between competition authorities, ministers of culture, media regulatory authorities, and we are a little bit waiting for that brainstorming to fully materialize and to lead to some tangible conclusions and tangible assessment elements. And on that basis, we will a bit later start our work so that we have, some material to work on. And then we will try to see, okay, what is the emerging consensus on how these media market concentrations have to be assessed, because in this particular area we found it a little bit difficult to start ourselves in abstract and go ahead and try to send European guidelines from Brussels to everyone, and rather prefer to base ourselves on the useful experience which is accumulating in member states. Now on this test with the public service media, that's a complicated one, I must say, because of course as a starting point you could say yes, it's probably relatively obvious that public service media, they exercise editorial responsibility over all the media content they produce. So then it's a question, okay, so there is this exercise of editorial responsibility. So here it's more of a question that you would, as audience or as anyone else, as a journalist, you would doubt whether the result of this exercise of editorial responsibility in a particular case was good or not that good, and what to do with this particular instance. So one reply would be, okay, they are still, they would have self-declared themselves, they would still benefit from those procedural safeguards. And then, okay, if a particular content is a piece of disinformation, then at the same time, they would be covered by this obligation in Digital Services Act to do assessment of risks and then ultimately propose some mitigation measures. But then again, this is more a systematic approach, you could say, and just on the basis of a single case like that, probably the DSA will not necessarily, and especially will not immediately kick in this particular case. So all in all, probably, whatever system or regulation we have, there will be, inevitably there will be scope for some, case by case, case by case, not case by case assessments, but some particular situations where still, despite the confirmation of exercise of editorial responsibility, questions arise with, is this particular content okay or not, and so on. But all in all, I think what we should strive at is that, generally speaking, the system works as well as possible. And then if we see problems, we can, of course, always revisit the situation, and we can come back to the guidelines and see whether they should be improved at some point in time in the future. And then from Mira on the self-declaration for self-regulation. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Ourselves in the Commission, we would perhaps hesitate to do that simply because it's about self-declaration. So we would not like to see ourselves as imposing some kind of registration, for example, for self-declaratory mechanisms. But it's a good question. Perhaps the media board, the new media board, could, since it's an independent body, perhaps we could help in this regard, and perhaps it could be an interesting solution in between a formal list and nothing. Perhaps something like a living contact list managed by the board, maintained by the board of different self-regulatory structures across Europe. So it's definitely worth exploring. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrius. Maybe Carlos, Renate, Damian, would you like to add something?
Yeah, before the others talk, just two things. I think that the question with the RAI, of course, is a good example, but it shows again this holistic approach. In theory, with Article 5, we fight media capture. If RAI would adhere to the standards as declared in Article 5, we would be much cooler. But we also know the reality, and we know how difficult it is. So I agree with Audrius on that point. We have to go with case-by-case issues. It won't never be easy, but I think this is the sort of balance we have to deal with. That just leads me to two other points. One is, thanks Charlotte, my colleague from our Flemish association. She put the link on regarding media councils. You may know that the EFJ has also been involved in a larger project on media councils in the digital age, which is finishing up soon with the support of the European Commission, where a lot of work has been done in terms of the actual state of media councils, information, but also creating some new media councils. We would have loved to have a continuation of such a project to now really get ready and have the health test for the self-regulatory bodies, but unfortunately, it seems we won't get that. Last point, I think Mira's question regarding the political will, which is very much in my or our heart as well, would be great. I know, Audrius, it's not easy. You are neutral bureaucrats to say that mildly, but we are living in a very, very dense and difficult situation here. So it almost seems to me sometimes a bit cynical to talk about content moderation when on the other side they say we don't care about that, and we are living in very, very disruptive moments. So yeah, but maybe we go to Thomas and Dirk for some other issues or the other colleagues.
Thank you. Damian and Carlos.
Hi, thanks everybody for all of the thoughtful contributions on self-regulation. Somebody some time ago asked if the Commission studies this, and in fact, they've done a number of studies, and in particular, a study that I did for the Commission, but that was 20 years ago, and self-regulation changes rather rapidly and quite a lot, but we do know some things. There is a little bit of an east-west divide, and the introduction of some self-regulatory bodies could indeed be welcomed, but there are also dangers in that, because there are, even within Western Europe, some countries have statutory press councils, which are established in law and indeed receive state funding, and others have completely voluntary schemes. As this scheme folds out, there's a I guess a kind of a tension around if it works, i.e. if it does have an effect on the bottom line for media, their ability to reach audiences and so forth, it will be contested. And I think at that point we'll begin to think about what the opportunity costs for platforms are if they are not able to demote news. It may be that affects their ability to generate revenue, and on the other side, it may be contested by media. But I think in all of those cases, there will be a natural tendency rather to question the criteria on which self-regulatory bodies are founded, and whether they are independent, whether they are effective. And I have to say, my view, and it's a little while since I looked systematically at the evidence, is that it's actually still quite a patchy view across the union in terms of quality and effectiveness of self-regulation. So I think the Commission should be aware of that. I really welcome what the Commission's doing to incentivize the creation of independent self-regulatory mechanisms. I think that's what we need to do. But I come back to what I said before. It needs to be quite carefully monitored, and we need to be aware that the existing frameworks are far from perfect.
Very quickly to add, I wanted to highlight Conrad Blair-Simon's comment in the chat, but I think it's one of the key issues here. Like, what happens when media with privilege are found spreading disinformation repeatedly, and under which conditions can they lose their privilege? I think Conrad's comment addresses what I have been trying to say before, which is that this has to be kind of a continuous process in which those open lines of evidence remain open. Even if you have been able to, to self-declare as media, particularly because that evidence, as I was saying, it's also going to be a measure of the capacity of the self-regulatory instruments to kind of make sure their rules are applied in real life. So I think this is important, and also that kind of disinformation evidence can be absolutely open, in the sense that everyone can clearly understand why something that someone has published should be considered disinformation.
Thank you, Carlos. I take the occasion to flag, in addition to the question of Conrad in the chat, which was also asking about what could be the role of Journalism Trash Initiative or NewsGuard in this process, and if they could be used as proof of quality and independence, and if the Commission or platforms could pay for auditing the JTI or NewsGuard assessments. And then also Yelena Berkovits was asking where could one access the readiness checks with the member states? And now I will leave the floor to Thomas and Dirk for their questions. And then I see also Elda. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sofia, and thanks particularly to you and all the speakers for the excellent inputs. I would have a question probably addressed to Audrius and Carlos. As well, Audrius, you're probably in touch with the big tech players about the future implementation of the EMFA, and particularly Article 18. And Carlos, well, as a fact-checking organizations, I assume that you also have regular contacts with the big tech platforms. And I would like to ask you what your impressions have been so far about their willingness to implement Article 18. Because what we have seen since January is that big tech platforms, particularly from the US, supported by the governments, are extremely hostile towards EU tech regulation. DSA and DMA are mentioned all the time. I have not heard anything about EMFA and Article 18 of the EMFA. So I would be interested in hearing from you what they intend to do. Are they really proactively considering the implementation of Article 18, or are they fighting against it, or are they just in a wait-and-see mode, well, assuming that their government might delay the implementation process? Do you have any insights on that?
I'm sure Audrius has information that I.
Oh, sorry, Carlos, could you repeat because I spoke over you?
No, I was going to say that I'm sure Audrius has more up-to-date information on Thomas' question. I haven't had a lot about concrete plans to implement Article 18, as Thomas was rightly saying. The current climate doesn't seem very eager to do the bare minimum that would be to say much about the current moment. So I am not aware. Last time I had a conversation about Article 18, most platforms were trying to kind of perfect channels for dedicated issues regarding that had been very, very difficult dealing with legitimate media providers like nudity or some others. But those were very, I would say, very preliminary conversations a few months ago. And maybe I'm absolutely wrong, and Audrius probably can speak to that, but I don't have the feeling that there is a big plan in place at the moment.
Thank you, Carlos. Maybe before leaving the floor to Audrius again, let's collect the questions from Dirk and Elda as well.
Yes, thank you, Sofia. I would like to come back on one of the concerns that Damian Tambini has expressed with regard to professional media services and non-for-profit civil society organizations. Of course, it's very good that EMFA is giving extra procedural guarantees for professional media organizations who have editorial responsibility to have their content distributed over these very large online platforms. But are we not forgetting then civil society organizations who are not service providers? Because it's not just that they cannot have a self-declaration because they're maybe not under the self-regulatory or co-regulatory systems, but they are not service providers in the terms of Article 56 and 57 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU. So my question is, but what is EU law doing to protect the freedom of expression of non-profit organizations, civil society, environmental groups, human rights defenders? They also are very vulnerable in this whole political and online system. And I'm afraid that EU law is not really giving strong tools for them to protect them like they do for the professional media services. So it's a bit a problem also with the word privilege. I thought that since the French Revolution, we have abolished the privileges. So we have to think in rights and freedoms. And according to the case law of the Strasbourg Court, also NGOs, non-for-profit organizations, have no economic activity. They should have the full right of freedom to express and distribute and forward their content so that it can be received by the people. So my question is maybe most to Audrius, what is EU law doing? Because in Audiovisual Media Services Act, Digital Services Act, EMFA, it's always about economic actors. That's my question.
Thank you, Dirk. Elda?
Yes. I would like to first to thank all the participants to this webinar, and thank you for joining our regular meetings now, I mean, on the European Media Freedom Act. And my question is mostly for Audrius, I assume, because I'm a little bit, let's say, concerned about the interplay of Article 18 with Article 34 and 35 of the Digital Services Act. Because considering that the platforms, so the very large online platforms, have to do the risk assessment and they have to deploy risk mitigation measures that are trying to limit those risks that are stemming from their services based on based on an evaluation of whether these services could be detrimental for media freedom, media pluralism, freedom of expression. Don't you think that in the end, considering that the risk assessment prevails on Article 18, we are in any case delegating to the very large online platforms the task to decide what should be online? That said, I think that in this very moment, having Article 18 that in the end can be implemented, can be applied in very limited cases, if you think, could be in any case a good safeguard against the unpredictability of the very large online platforms that are considering the turbulent times we are right now. So my main question is about the interplay of Article 18 EMFA with Article 34 and 35 of the European Media of the Digital Services Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Elda. Please, Audrius and the other speakers, if you would like to reply.
Yes, thank you, Sofia. So first of all, on the Thomas's question about the willingness of platforms, it's not so easy these days actually to read the willingness of platforms to do things when it comes to compliance with European rules. In this particular case of Article 18 of Media Freedom Act, so based on this first exchange, well, it still felt a little bit like a preliminary exchange. So, you know, it's not based on something concrete, but the impression we were left with is that they don't mind preparing for this Article 18, and they are starting to get ready. But perhaps a more concrete moment of truth will come when we will publish the draft for consultation. Probably at that stage we will see more clearly what is the expectation of the Commission, the draft expectation of the Commission, and at that moment probably we will react more concretely, and perhaps we'll be able to assess this willingness a little bit better in a more concrete way. And in any case, you know, all of this is quite dynamic, so this concept of willingness probably is not static, so we have to see how, generally speaking, the whole environment evolves, and probably, you know, if we have a degree of willingness right now, it does not necessarily mean we will have the same degree later on. So let's see. It's a quite a unstable area in my personal view. Now on the civil society organizations, so of course, by all means, they are important. And for example, when the Commission is doing its rule of law reports, the environment for civil society organizations is always a component of Commission's rule of law reports. It's only because of our policy focus which is very much on media markets, on media service providers, and how we work, and also users of media service providers, that we in general had this focus for the European Media Freedom Act. But there is also, as always, there are legal reasons behind choices. And of course, the legal reason was that if we want to do an EU law instrument in the media field, we have to have a legal basis, and the legal basis which was available to us was the internal market legal basis. So this is why we had to have a clear link with the internal market logic and really focus on media service providers. But this is not to say that civil society organizations are forgotten, and on the contrary, I think when you will see something published on the Defense of Democracy Shield, I think you are quite likely to see things about civil society organizations and ideas to strengthen their role there in that context. Then there were also questions from the chat that Sofia you referred to. So for the readiness checks, at this stage, we don't yet have anything like tangible and concrete to direct people to, because it's an ongoing process. It consists of meetings, but also a work by member states on replies to a questionnaire, and then ultimately another stage will be for us to draw some lessons from those replies to a questionnaire. But at this stage, we don't yet have anything in terms of tangible information to which we could point you. And then on GTI and similar existing structures, well, I know that discussions are ongoing between stakeholders. They are quite alive on mechanisms like this, and it's definitely one of the mechanisms, but we have to see a little bit to what extent it spreads in the market. We know that it spreads to some extent, but we know also about let's say voices which do not necessarily see GTI as the way forward. So we are at this point in time, we are observing what is going on without yet having a very concrete opinion, I must say. And then there was a question from Elda about interrelation with DSA and risk assessments and delegating ultimately the decision to the platform. So in a way, it's true that Article 18 has its particular scope of application. So of course, it's just an element in the overall balance between what is subject to regulation, what is subject to self-regulation, what is of course subject to media freedom and freedom of expression, and what is subject indeed to application of terms by platforms and to their private decisions. And yes, at that time the Commission was proposing Media Freedom Act, and then later in co-legislative discussions, it was decided and settled like that, that indeed Media Freedom Act does not affect what platforms do in compliance with Digital Services Act and the risk assessment obligations. So that's in a way decided. We have to take it as it is and focus now, I would say, on the more practical aspects, on these guidelines, and how actually Article 18 will unfold in practice. So let's say we absolutely understand your point, but in a way it was a bit more at the center than we were at the stage of co-legislative discussions, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we have 3 minutes left, but I would like to ask to the other speakers if they would like to leave us with a final note or final comment.
Maybe I start, Sofia, just 2 words. Yeah, we talked a lot about self-regulatory mechanisms. There are also questions, what about those quality media who don't have it in their countries, what they can do? As I said in my outline, it should be a great stimulus. I also talked to some journalists in media who said, yeah, this is actually great because now maybe our employers now think about it in another way and get something, be it at national level or at media company level. I think this is the right way forward because we are talking about trust here. And without trust, we know there is no future also in terms of viability. Having said that, the other point we mentioned less is adherence to media transparency, 6.1. We had, in preparing the EMFA, a bit of resistance from many publishers, not all, who thought transparency would not be helpful specifically for so-called family publishers. But I think if they want to deserve something like a privilege, they now have to adhere, and it must be possible. So yeah, I want to end on this positive note that this should be used as a stimulus. And the second point, without also from the Commission side, and I really thank Audrius for his consistent work and his team, but without enforcement by the Commission, enforcement, we may all lose it and get very, very frustrated. And so, yeah, this is another appeal to take it all very seriously. Thank you.
Well, as you embark on this next chapter, Audrius, all power to you and good luck. It's a really important task. I want to just focus in closing on this question of the functionality that will be provided by the platforms to self-declare. I, in preparation for this morning, just had a quick search around to look to see if there was any evidence that platforms are already deploying it. It's probably a bit too late, too early rather, to actually find any examples. And in any case, I'm speaking to you from the wilderness of former member state, speaking to you from Oxford. So I wouldn't necessarily see any of that functionality. But I just wanted to just mention that I think as platforms do offer people, presumably when they register their account, the ability to self-declare as media, they have a lot of power in terms of shaping and gaming this procedure. And it may be that in your guidance, you need to narrow the options available to them. So they can nudge users in particular directions, either to have more people self-declaring as media or less. And they can also have quite a big effect on the transparency data that's going to be available in terms of the different categories. And we mentioned, a number of people have mentioned the importance of non-profits, local media, community media, also being able to declare, as well as the big professional media organizations. So in issuing the guidance, I hope that you can be very clear on exactly how those functionalities should be designed and which categories of data that we'll be able to refer to as we look back and monitor how this has actually been implemented. So good luck with that, and thanks to the organisers this morning for a fascinating discussion.
I'm going to add just very briefly that I think all the more reason to get it right, as Renate was mentioning, is that this is kind of a first experience of having this kind of registry at the EU level, and we can all see how this might be used for different purposes in the future. So that's, I think, all the more reason to take a broader view of making sure the mechanisms that empower self-regulation, which is going to be probably the door most companies are going to be using, are strong enough to, to serve for the purposes of current Article 18, but for different other ways of media differentiation in the future.
Thank you very much. So I will close thanking all of you, our speakers, and everyone in the audience, my colleagues at the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom, especially Urbano Reviglio and Elda Brogi for organizing this whole series of webinars. The next one, again, I would like to remind you, will be on the 24th of March, and we will focus on Article 6 of EMFA, the duties of media service providers, focusing on transparency required to media service providers, and one of the topics we really much looked into today, which is the independence of media service providers. Thank you very much, everyone, and I wish you a good start of the week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Yeah, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.